It was supposed to be a simple field study. I had received the grant, my dream project, studying the population of the elusive nighthawk on a remote, abandoned island. The species had been nearly wiped out, but rumors whispered that a small population clung to life somewhere on that forsaken place. But what was supposed to be a peaceful, solitary endeavor turned out to be much more than I could have imagined. The problem wasn't the island, it was Derek, my husband. It wasn't just the fact that he insisted on accompanying me, it was his unwavering obsession with a strange device he had been testing. An acoustic dome, he called it, a project of his own invention. It blocked out every external sound, creating complete isolation. He had tested it in various environments, but this time he wanted it on the island, he said. I thought it was just another one of his experiments, one of his dreams that consumed him. But he wouldn't let it go. And so, despite my reservations, I agreed to let him come. We arrived together on the old ferry. Derek was already obsessed with the dome, his eyes gleaming as he set it up near the lighthouse, talking nonstop about its potential. I had no interest in hearing his theories. Instead, I focused on the task at hand, finding the nighthawk and studying its behavior. Derek, of course, wasn't content with just being an observer. He was always more than that. He insisted on setting up a monitoring station for his dome near the lighthouse, as though the place wasn't haunted by enough strange stories already. The island was silent, shrouded in an eerie fog that never seemed to lift. I settled in the old house by the lighthouse, the one that had been abandoned for years, its creaking bones seeming to sigh in the wind. It was a strange, cold place, but it was the perfect spot for my work. The only other person on the island was Caleb, a man who rarely spoke, but played a hauntingly beautiful cello every evening. His music would echo through the fog, each note reverberating in the thick air, pulling me into a strange trance. The sound of it was the only thing that seemed to break the silence of the island, and it was so hypnotic, so otherworldly, that it became a part of the island itself, as if the fog, the lighthouse, and Caleb's music were all woven together in a spell I couldn't break free from. I tried to ignore him, but every day, without fail, I would find myself drawn to the sound of his cello, standing by the window and listening, as though something in me was being pulled by the rhythm of his music. And then, on the 5th night of my stay, I noticed something unusual. Caleb wasn't playing his cello by the lighthouse as usual. Instead, he stood in the yard, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. I couldn't help but watch him. His silence, his gaze, his unspoken presence, it felt like he was communicating with something beyond me, beyond the island. It wasn't just the music that was drawing me in, it was him. And then, on the 7th night, something changed. I stumbled upon a hidden door in the lighthouse's basement. It was tucked away behind a stack of old crates, almost as though it had been forgotten. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Down a narrow staircase, I discovered a room filled with old tapes. They were labeled simply, women's voices. But it was the sound of the tapes that sent a chill down my spine. All of them whispered the same name, Miranda. I froze. How could that be? I had never been here before, and yet, the name sounded so familiar. It couldn't be mine, could it? I didn't know what to think, but the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. This wasn't just some coincidence. There was something strange happening on this island, and I felt like I was at the center of it, though I had no idea why. When I confronted Caleb, he didn't speak. He simply gestured, his hands moving in slow, deliberate motions. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I thought I saw something behind them, something ancient, something old, as if he had known this moment was coming for a long time. He made a slow, deliberate gesture toward the tapes, then to the lighthouse, and finally to me. It wasn't his voice that spoke, but his silence. And in that silence, I began to understand. The lighthouse had its own memory. It was as though the island had been waiting for me, just like it had waited for the others before me. I didn't believe it. I couldn't. But as I looked into Caleb's eyes, something in me began to tremble. The next few days felt like a blur. I tried to focus on my work, but the island and its strange inhabitants kept pulling me deeper into something I couldn't quite explain. Caleb's cello music was no longer just a background sound. It became the heartbeat of the island, a pulse I couldn't ignore. It was as if the music was speaking to me, a language I didn't understand but felt in my bones. His playing was always perfect, always mesmerizing, drawing me closer to him each time. It wasn't just the music anymore. It was the silence he carried with him, that impenetrable quiet that seemed to wrap itself around him like a cloak. His gaze never left me when we were near each other, and when our eyes met, there was something in his expression that made my heart race. It wasn't desire. It was something deeper, something older. It was as though he could see into me, past all the walls I had carefully built over the years. I had convinced myself that I was just being overdramatic, that it was the isolation getting to me. I was on an island, alone with my thoughts, a place where time seemed to move differently. But there was something about Caleb that I couldn't shake. His presence was magnetic, drawing me in despite my best efforts to keep my distance. At night, when the fog rolled in thick and heavy, I would find myself standing by the window, listening to his cello, as it weaved through the fog like a dream. It felt like I was being pulled into the music, as if it was calling to me, speaking to something inside me that I hadn't known was there. I began to believe that Caleb wasn't just playing for the sake of music. He was playing for me. Every note seemed to speak my name, echoing in the silent night, reverberating in my mind long after the music stopped. It was impossible to explain, but I knew that when he played, he was reaching into me, hearing something in my soul that no one else could. And each time I listened, it was like I was losing myself more and more to him. Then came the night that everything changed. It was late, the fog had rolled in thick as usual, and Caleb's cello was playing softly in the distance. But this time, I didn't just listen. I followed the sound, my feet moving on their own accord, drawn by the music in a way I couldn't resist. I found myself standing in front of the lighthouse, the door to the basement wide open, a soft light spilling out from the stairs. Caleb was already there, waiting. He didn't say anything, but his eyes told me everything I needed to know. Without a word, he led me down into the basement again, where the tapes were stored. This time, he didn't show me the tapes. Instead, he showed me the room beyond them, a small, dimly lit space, where a chair sat in the middle of the floor. He gestured for me to sit, and I did, almost without thinking. The moment I sank into the chair, the room seemed to hum with energy, the silence pressing in from all sides. Caleb stepped behind me, his hands brushing against my skin as he adjusted something near my head. The sound of his cello was suddenly closer, louder, as if it were coming from within the very walls. I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me, but this time, something was different. The music was no longer just sound. It was something tangible, something that moved through me, filling every part of my being. I could feel the vibrations in my chest, my head, my limbs. It wasn't just music anymore. It was a presence, a force that I couldn't escape. And then I felt his presence behind me, his hands on my shoulders, his fingers pressing gently into my skin. The touch was soft, almost imperceptible, but it sent a shock of electricity through my body. I turned to look at him, and his eyes met mine, filled with an intensity that stole my breath. He was silent, but in that silence, I understood everything. His music, his gaze, his very being, it was all for me. In that moment, I knew he had been waiting for me, just as I had been waiting for him. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a pull, as natural as breathing, that led me to him. The night stretched on, and time seemed to lose all meaning. Caleb's cello continued to play, each note a thread that wove us together in a way I couldn't explain, but didn't want to resist. And when it was over, when the music faded into the fog, there was only silence between us. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence full of understanding, full of unspoken words that we didn't need to say. But then the morning came, and with it, the return of Derek. I had almost forgotten about him in the haze of the night. I didn't know what I expected when I saw him standing on the shore, but it wasn't what actually happened. Derek had arrived unexpectedly, his eyes scanning the island as though he knew exactly what had transpired between Caleb and me. I had never seen him look so calm, so detached. He walked toward me with a slow, measured pace, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he spoke. "I see you've gotten close," he said, his voice low, almost like he was acknowledging something I had already known. But when I looked at him, I didn't see the man I had married. I saw a stranger, someone who had been watching, observing, collecting data on me, on Caleb, on everything. It was then that Derek revealed the truth. The dome, the silence, the isolation, it wasn't about Caleb. It wasn't about the birds or my research. It had all been a part of his experiment, a test to see how humans behave when stripped of all external connections. He had been watching me through cameras, tracking my movements, studying my reactions. He had brought Caleb here to help him with this twisted project, a project that wasn't about science, but about control. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to feel. My anger surged, a hot wave that rushed through my body, and I lashed out at him. But as I moved, something strange happened. My body grew slower, as though the air itself had thickened around me. Time seemed to stretch, to slow, and Derek, with a cruel smirk, activated the second level of the dome. Time itself was frozen, and I was trapped. I couldn't move. Derek's voice echoed in the thick, oppressive silence of the dome, but the words didn't reach me the way they should have. It was as if the air itself had thickened, slowed, turning every movement into a struggle, every breath a heavy weight. My body felt like it was made of lead, as though the very fabric of reality had been stretched and warped around me. The once familiar world was now distorted, each second stretching into eternity, leaving me trapped in this strange, suspended moment. Derek stood there, his eyes filled with cold detachment, watching me as I struggled against the slow, suffocating grasp of the dome. His smile never faltered. He explained, his voice a quiet hum beneath the crushing weight of time. The dome was more than just a device for isolating sound. It was a mechanism to distort reality itself, to break the human mind and spirit by severing all connections with the outside world. And I had been part of his experiment, though I hadn't known it. Derek had been watching me the entire time, monitoring my every move, recording my behavior for the military. His project wasn't about the Nighthawk or the island. It was about control, about studying the human psyche when it was cut off from everything it knew, everything it loved. He had designed the dome specifically for this purpose. He had created a place where human connections could be severed, where people could be broken without ever knowing why. The revelation hit me like a slap to the face, the truth coming at me in jagged shards that I struggled to piece together. Derek, the man I had married, had manipulated me from the start, and I had been too blind to see it. The love I thought we shared, the trust one had placed in him, none of it had been real. I had been nothing more than a subject in his twisted experiment, a test subject in a grand plan that didn't involve me at all. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to face him, the rage inside me building to a fever pitch. How could he do this? How could he betray me like this? The questions surged through my mind, each one more painful than the last. But before I could even form a response, I felt a presence beside me. Caleb was there, standing just a few feet away, his eyes locked on Derek. He had been silent this entire time, but now, as the tension in the air grew thick and suffocating, he stepped forward, his expression unreadable. I couldn't quite grasp what he was thinking, but there was a certain resolve in his gaze, a calmness that seemed at odds with the chaos around us. His silence spoke volumes, and in that silence, I knew what he was about to do. Caleb wasn't a part of Derek's game. He had never been a mere instrument in the experiment. And now, in this moment of betrayal, Caleb was about to make his own choice. The air shifted as Caleb moved closer to Derek, his hands slowly reaching up to remove the mask that had concealed his face for so long. The mask came off with a soft sound, and for the first time, I saw Caleb for who he really was. He wasn't just the strange man who played the cello in the fog. He wasn't just a part of Derek's plan. He was someone else entirely, a man who had been shaped by the same experiments, but who had ultimately chosen a different path. He had been through this before, over and over again. Caleb had been a part of multiple isolation experiments, sent to places just like this, meant to break and conform to the twisted designs of those who sought to control. But something had changed this time. Something had made him realize that he couldn't be a puppet any longer. He had fallen in love, not with the idea of control, not with the isolation, but with the real connection that had formed between us, even in the silence. Without a word, Caleb reached out and tore the device from its place, breaking the structure of the dome with one swift movement. The sound of its destruction was like a crack of thunder, the force of it reverberating through the very air we breathed. The walls of the dome began to crumble, the time-slowing effect lifting, but in its wake came chaos. The ground trembled beneath us as if the island itself was waking from a long, deep sleep. I could feel the world around me shifting, the pressure in the air beginning to release, like a dam bursting, letting the light flood back in. But just as the dome began to break apart, the world around us seemed to ignite. There was an explosion. It wasn't loud, not in the traditional sense, but it was deafening in its power, a pulse that sent shockwaves through the air, shaking the ground beneath my feet. The lighthouse trembled, the walls cracking, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to slow to a crawl, as if time itself had been unraveled. I reached out, but I couldn't catch my breath. The world spun wildly, disorienting and unreal. I saw Derek's face, twisted in shock and anger, but it was fleeting, just a blur in the chaos. And then, before I could make sense of it, there was light, bright and blinding, flooding every corner of the island. I don't know what happened next. I felt my body jerk, pulled from one reality to another, and then everything went dark. I woke up with the taste of salt on my lips and the sound of waves crashing gently against the shore. The air felt fresh, sharp, the kind of wind that clears your mind, and for a moment, I thought I might still be trapped in the dream I had just woken from. But the pain in my head told me otherwise. The ground beneath me was rough and uneven, the jagged rocks digging into my skin as I sat up. My body was sore, every muscle aching as though I had been thrown around like a rag doll. But there was something else, something familiar. The sound of the ocean, the call of distant birds, the soft creaking of the lighthouse, it all felt so real. I looked around and realized I was lying on the shore, alone. The island, so vast and quiet just days before, now felt eerily still, as though it had been frozen in time. For a moment, I just sat there, trying to gather myself, trying to make sense of what had happened. The explosion, the shattering of the dome, Caleb's face as he destroyed it. Everything felt like a fragmented memory, distant and fading. Where was Caleb? Where was Derek? The questions echoed in my mind, but no answers came. I stood up, unsteady on my feet, and looked out across the water, my heart pounding in my chest. The island seemed empty, but not in the way it had been when I first arrived. It was different now, as though something had changed, something fundamental had shifted. I stumbled toward the lighthouse, my legs shaky, my mind still clouded with confusion. The building looked untouched, standing as it had before, though the damage from the explosion seemed to be gone. No signs of destruction. No signs of Caleb or Derek. The lighthouse was silent, and for a moment, I almost expected to hear the soft, hypnotic strains of Caleb's cello drifting through the air. But there was nothing. Just silence. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, my heart racing with anticipation and dread. The place felt hollow, as though it had lost its purpose, the echo of past lives still lingering in the walls. But Caleb wasn't here. Derek wasn't here. I made my way to the basement, my footsteps muffled on the worn wooden floor. The door to the room with the tapes was still open, the tapes untouched, their labels still whispering my name. Miranda. My heart skipped in my chest, the name pulling at me like an invisible force. I reached out to touch one of the tapes, but something stopped me. The room felt different now, colder, emptier, as if the air itself had lost its weight. And then, in the silence, I heard it, a soft, distant sound, like the faintest hum, like the memory of music. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there, hanging in the air like a thread connecting me to something, someone. I turned toward the sound, my breath catching in my throat. It was coming from somewhere above, from the stairs leading back up to the lighthouse. Without thinking, I began to climb, each step heavier than the last. As I reached the top, I felt the pressure in my chest ease slightly, but there was still a gnawing sense of unease, like something was missing. The room at the top of the lighthouse was empty. No Caleb. No Derek. The cello music, faint as it was, continued to drift in from somewhere just beyond my reach, teasing me with its promise. I closed my eyes and tried to follow it, but it was fading, slipping away like sand through my fingers. And then I felt it. A shift. A presence in the air. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A feeling of being watched, but not in the way I had been watched before. This wasn't Derek's cold, calculating gaze. This wasn't the distant observation of someone testing their experiment. No, this was something different. Something real. I opened my eyes and saw him. Caleb. He was standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on me with a strange intensity. He looked different, though. Not in any obvious way, but something about him had changed. His expression wasn't one of silence or distance anymore. It was open, vulnerable, but also full of a quiet strength. His gaze seemed to pierce right through me, and for a moment, I felt as though I could see into his very soul. I felt the pull of him again, like a magnetic force, but this time it wasn't driven by the isolation or the silence of the dome. This time, it was something real, something raw. He had never spoken a word to me, but now, in this moment, I could hear him in a way I hadn't before. His eyes told me everything. He had been through this before, more times than I could count, but now he had chosen to break free. He had chosen to feel. I took a step toward him, not knowing what to say, but feeling as though I had to close the distance between us. There was no fear now, only the quiet certainty that he wasn't a part of Derek's plan anymore. He had shattered the dome, the walls that had isolated us both, and in doing so, he had set himself free. Caleb reached out, his hand brushing against mine, and the contact was electric, grounding me, reminding me of everything that had happened on this island, the music, the silence, the broken walls, the explosion. The time that had slowed and now rushed back into me like a wave. We're free, Caleb's gaze seemed to say, though his lips never moved. And for the first time, I understood. But as I looked out the window of the lighthouse, the horizon stretching before me, I realized the truth that had been buried beneath all of this. Derek, Caleb, the dome. It was all part of something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. The experiment, the control, the isolation, it wasn't just about us. It was about something else entirely. And now, with the dome broken and time back in motion, I could feel the world outside starting to press in, its weight crashing down on me once again. But I wasn't alone anymore. And somewhere, in the far distance, I heard it again, the cello. Faint, but real. Caleb's music, pulling me into the future, one note at a time. When I woke up again, I was lying on the shore, the morning sun casting long shadows over the sand, the gentle waves licking at my feet. The world around me was quiet, as though the storm that had torn everything apart had passed, leaving only the echoes of what had been. The lighthouse, the island, even the air itself seemed to be waiting, suspended in a strange, peaceful stillness. I tried to move, but my body was stiff, every muscle aching, the remnants of the explosion still fresh in my mind. It had felt like the very earth had split beneath us, the air had thickened, and the dome, Derek's dome, had crumbled, shattering reality for a moment. Now, as I lay there on the shore, I couldn't help but wonder, had it really happened, or was it just another trick of my mind, another piece of this twisted experiment? I pushed myself up, the weight of everything bearing down on me. Caleb was gone. So was Derek. Neither of them were here, and the island, as still as it seemed, felt empty, like a forgotten dream. The memories of everything, the music, the silence, the slow suffocation of time, clung to me like a second skin. I glanced around, trying to find some trace of them, but there was nothing. Not a sign, not a footprint in the sand. Just the remnants of something broken, something that had once been alive and full of purpose. The project. Derek's experiment. The dome that had distorted everything. It was all gone, or at least it felt that way. The island, once so full of strange energy, now felt abandoned, like a place that no longer mattered. I stood up and took a step forward, the sand shifting beneath my feet, each step heavier than the last. My body ached, but it wasn't just the physical pain. It was something deeper, something that had settled into my bones over the days I had spent here, trapped in the silence of the dome. I felt like I had lost something, someone, something I couldn't fully comprehend. Caleb. I didn't know where he had gone, or even if he was real, but there was one thing I knew for sure. He was no longer part of the experiment. He had broken free. He had chosen to love, to be free from the silent prison that had held us both. I didn't know if he had left the island, or if he was still somewhere out there, waiting for me, but I knew he had made his choice. And somehow, so had I. I turned and walked toward the lighthouse, the wind picking up as I climbed the stairs to the top. The place had once felt like a cage, a place of isolation, but now it felt different. It felt like the last piece of a puzzle I hadn't understood, a place that had held memories of pain and longing, but also of connection. And in that connection, I had found something real. The cello music, faint as it had been a part of that connection. The music had become the thread that linked us, Caleb and me, to something beyond the dome, beyond Derek's twisted experiments. And now that the dome was gone, now that the walls of silence had crumbled, I could feel the world opening up again. The island was still there, but I wasn't the same. Derek had tried to control me, tried to isolate me, but in the end, he had failed. The dome had been his attempt to shape reality, to manipulate time and sound, to see how far human minds could be pushed before they broke. But it hadn't broken me. It had only made me stronger, more aware of the power of connection. I wasn't just a subject in an experiment anymore. I was a person, free to make my own choices. The island had once been a prison, but now it was a place of freedom. I sat by the window, looking out at the ocean, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain: I had survived. The island, the dome, the silence, they were all part of the past now. But the future, whatever it held, was mine to shape. I could hear the faintest whisper of a cello in the distance, the music lingering in the air like a memory. It was Caleb's music, a reminder that no matter what had happened, no matter how far the island had tried to isolate me, I wasn't alone. The sound of my own heart beat in time with the rhythm of the cello. The world had been quiet for so long, but now it was filled with the noise of life. The birds were flying again, the wind was whispering through the trees, and somewhere, just beyond the horizon, the nighthawks were calling. They were still out there, still alive, just like I was. And in that moment, I knew that nothing at all could ever silence me again. The sound of the cello grew fainter, but it was still there, barely perceptible in the wind. It was real. Caleb was real. And somehow, we would find each other again.